Hi everyone, let us head back to the code that we had written which was responsible for printing the numbers from 1 to n, and each thread was assigned a unique number. We basically wanted to print all the numbers in sorted fashion. Here there is a slight change. I want to print from 0 to certain number, from 0 to 9. So if there are 10 threads from T1 to T10, then they are assigned numbers from 0 to 9. So nothing will change, the logic will remain as it is, and this code will perfectly work. The change that we had made in the last class was to simply introduce a lock, and instead of making this variable volatile, we were relying on the synchronized blocks. So if I run this code, it will produce the perfect output. And here it is. You can see that the output is from 0 to 9, that too in sorted fashion. Now I want you to take up a simple challenge. So imagine this was a quick interview puzzle for you, and now your interviewer asks you to make a small change in it. The small change is that I want to do this sort of thing for certain number of rounds. So let's say there is a variable int rounds, which could be anything. For example, let's say 3. Now what I want to do is I want to print the pattern from 0 to 9 in 3 rounds, but each round should be sorted. So in the first round, my output should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And in the next round also the same output, and in the next round also the same output. So as many rounds I have, those many times printing should happen from 0 to 9. And each round should be individually sorted in itself. So can you imagine what code changes I'll have to bring in over here? I believe you guys have already seen the worker class. You already know we had written a compare method, and inside compare method, we were acquiring a lock before reading the current, and before changing the current also, we were acquiring the exactly same lock. Okay. So here, if I want to do this thing for certain rounds, which parts of code will change? Why don't you pause the video and think of it on your own? Let's do that. Okay, so there are several things that comes to our mind. First thing that comes to our mind is that, hey, every thread that is running should somehow know that how many rounds are there. So the easiest way is to pass these rounds inside the worker. Right? So what I'm going to simply do is inside this worker, I'm going to introduce a new instance variable. It is going to be a private int rounds. I'll tell you why I have not kept this variable as final, because I'll be changing it. So if there are 5 rounds, then after printing first, I'll do rounds minus minus. Then again rounds minus minus. So I have not kept it final, but I'll get it through a constructor. So I'll have rounds and I'll initialize it in this manner. This dot rounds equal to the past number of rounds. Okay, now it means that I'll have to perform changes inside main also, because now this constructor has changed. Okay, so as you can see, I have made the necessary changes over here. Okay, cool. Now what to do next? So here, if I go inside run method, the straightforward thing that comes to our mind is that, hey, instead of doing this thing only once, let's put it inside a loop and make that loop run for 3 times, or as many times as the value of rounds is. So what I can simply do is I can have a while loop which says that while rounds is positive, we will execute this body. So let me cut it and paste it over here. Now whenever a particular iteration of this outer while loop has finished, I can simply do rounds minus minus. Okay, as simple as that. Cool. So far, it looks very good. But are there certain things that comes to your mind? Do you believe that we are still missing out on certain changes? If yes, then what is that? Just pause and think. Okay, first thing, let me tell you, do you believe there will be some sort of race condition for rounds over here? Because when you look at this rounds, it was a variable that we created here and we passed it around. So what do you say? Is it a pass by reference or is it a pass by value? So if you do not know, let me tell you that this is pass by value, because primitive types, when you pass them, they are always passed by value. Okay, so there is no shared data. I mean, this rounds is not shared data. Every thread has its own personal copy of rounds. Okay, so no need to think in terms of race conditions. Relax. Okay, but is there anything else that I have to worry about? So let's head back to this. So let's run this code and see what is the output that it generates. Okay, this is the output, and I am certainly not happy with this output, because it looks like after my thread 1 was scheduled, it got scheduled again. Okay, see, it's your thread 1 which has been assigned the value 0. So if the value 0 has been printed twice, it means that 2 iterations of thread 1 ran. But my expectation was that after the first iteration of thread 1, which is after the first iteration of this while loop of thread 1, I would want the first iteration of next thread to happen. Then the first iteration of next thread to happen. Then the first iteration of next thread to happen. Right? And when the first iteration of all the 10 threads would have happened, I would want the same thing in the same sequence to happen again. This would be my expectation. But I am not able to ensure that. So who is the culprit? Where is the culprit? Can you just pause and find that out? Okay, look at how this compare method is written. See, this compare method was written by the logic that if the value assigned to the thread is greater than the current value, then that thread should basically stay trapped inside this while loop. Okay? But can you imagine what would happen after thread 1 has printed its data? Let's say thread 1 has printed its data, which is 0. Okay? After that, if thread 1 is again scheduled, or let's say no context switch happened, it is still being run by your CPU scheduler, in that case, this compare method would end up returning false, isn't it? Why? Because it would see that after the comparison of value with main.current, the value would be 0 and main.current would simply be equal to 1, right? And it would see that, hey, this condition is not true, and because of that, this loop would break. So see, this condition was totally perfect for the previous iteration of the question, where we did not have rounds, because we knew that once my thread 1 has done its printing, its body is over. The logic is over. It is done. The function exits. But here, that is not true. Okay? So there is some change that I need to make over here. Otherwise, what will happen is that threads that have just printed some data might get rescheduled again, or if the context switch does not happen, this condition would evaluate to false for them. Okay, let's say the thread 1 has just printed its data and its next iteration is happening. In the next iteration, the value of thread 1 or thread 2, whichever thread it is, that value will not change, but the value of current would have become greater. And because of that, this condition would evaluate to false. Okay, and once it evaluates to false, that thread would come down and print its value again. So that is the basic problem which is happening over here. So in order to fix that, I can say that this is going to be my condition now. Because now I would say that, hey, the thread that should be allowed to print at this point of time, it should be that whose value is equal to the current. If the value is greater and if the value is smaller, that should not print. Okay, that is the basic idea. So this is one change that I can make, and then I can run my code again. Upon running it, I can see that my code is hung. I mean, it printed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So basically it printed the first round correctly, but the next rounds are not happening. Can you imagine why? Do you think something is wrong with this part of the code? Just pause and think. The answer is yes. Because when the last thread would have printed, it would have made this current equals to 10, right? Now, when it would have made this current equals to 10, for none of the threads, this compare method would ever return a value that is false. Okay? Why? Let us simply understand that because value associated with all the threads are in between 0 to 9 and the current has become equals to 10. Okay? So it would never ever happen that this method returns false. So basically all the threads would stay trapped inside this while loop. So here what do I need to do? Instead of changing in this manner, I should rather be doing something like this: main.current plus 1 mod 10. Why I'm doing mod 10? Because when you take modulus, the values cycle back. So 9 plus 1 mod 10 will be back to 0, and that would ensure that now out of all the threads, it will be the first thread which will be scheduled, which will be able to come out of this while loop that it was trapped in. And now it looks that everything is good. So maybe let's rerun this program and see for ourselves that what happens. So as you can see now that this is the first round where we printed data from 0 to 9. And then that's a second round where we again printed from 0 to 9. And then this looks like our last round. Okay. You can in fact go ahead and play around with it. You can change the value of rounds from 3 to 5 or from 3 to 10. And then you can run your code several times again and again to convince yourself whether it works or not. So here again, I can see that from 0 to 9 printed once. This is second. That's third. That's fourth. And this is fifth. Okay, cool. So to sum it up, this rounds was passed by value, not by reference. So there was no race conditions at all. However, the important thing was that we needed to change this condition. Okay, why we needed to change this condition? Because in our case, a particular thread is undergoing multiple iterations. Okay, so we basically needed to make this condition more strong, more concrete, I would say. Do you think that if we had kept this condition even for the previous variation of this question, then it would have worked? Just think about it. Just take it as a food for thought. The next thing was to change current in this manner. Okay, cool. Now there is one more thing that I would want you to assign as a food for thought. So guys, here, this rounds, it was passed by value. So if there were 10 threads, there were 10 copies of this rounds variable. Can you somehow make this rounds variable as public static? You can do that very easily. But in that case, do you think this code will still work? The answer is probably no. Why? Because all those multiple threads will be having the same copy of rounds, so there can be race conditions. So how do you deal with that? Can you basically have a single copy of rounds which is public static and make changes in this code and get it working as expected? Let's take it as a challenge.